Hello and welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock. This morning I am sitting in a KOA campground in Grayville, Illinois, just over the Indiana border. On this episode we will talk to Chad Rosen, founder and CEO of Victory Hemp Foods in Carrolton, Kentucky. Victory Hemp Foods makes American-grown hemp ingredients for manufacturers and brands, creating great-tasting, highly nutritious plant-based foods grown by American farmers. Back in January, I interviewed Ben Raymond. He's the head of research and development at Victory, and that's episode 117, so go check that out. But yeah, on this episode, we talked to Chad Rosen, who started the whole thing. But before we get into this interview with Chad, I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors, IND Hemp, New Holland Agriculture, the National Hemp Association, Rose Downs, Omenaushon Cast Hemp, Pterodon Hemp, and King's Agri-Seeds. Thank you all for your support. Couldn't be doing this without you. Chad Rosen, founder and CEO of Victory Hemp Foods here in Carrolton, Kentucky. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to have a visitor.
Yeah, this is neat. So this is the second official stop on our hemp fiber and grain tour. So thanks for having us out here. I wonder if you could just give us a little introduction.
Yeah, sure. So we're here in Carrolton, Kentucky, which is right in the Ohio River Valley, about 40 minutes north of Louisville and another 40 minutes to an hour south of Cincinnati. And by the way, the crow flies, it's equidistant to Lexington, but you got to come through a bunch of hills and hollers to get here, go through Frankfort, so it'll probably take you about 2 hours to get all the way back to Lexington. But we're in the heart of hemp country for sure.
All right. How did you choose this area? Because you're from California originally. I know you've lived all over, but why here?
Yeah, that's a long, winding story, but it really, why Kentucky, why Carrolton? Let's just talk about Kentucky. I mean, there was just fierce optimism for what hemp could do in the Commonwealth. And it was driven by constituents of some of the strongest politicians in D.C. to bring hemp into the rotation by allowing it to fit into a rotation, descheduling it, legalizing it, and they did all that through the 2014 Farm Bill, and then consummated it with full descheduling in the 2018 Farm Bill.
We're talking McConnell and Comer.
McConnell, Comer, and Comer at the time was he was the Secretary of Ag here in Commissioner of Agriculture in Kentucky. Yeah. So but I mean, Massey was on board. All the legislators, the entire state was on board. It just we had a long history of growing hemp in Kentucky, and you can't really go very far without people telling you a little bit of a story about how their granddaddy grew hemp in the war for the war effort, and you know, there's relics of it all over the state.
Had you started the business before you came here, or did you come here and then start the business?
Yeah, no, I kind of got my feet wet in with talking to folks that were in the industry. So I actually traveled down to Australia, traveled up to Canada, talked to processors. I kind of had a pretty fierce idea that grain was the space that I wanted to focus in, and so went and talked to processors and tried to learn a little bit. So it was all kind of coming together. It was what and where. The what was grain, and the where was going to be Kentucky. And so yeah.
Okay. And then so describe the business. What are you producing?
Yep.
What parts of the grain are you using?
Yep. So we're a B2B food ingredient manufacturer. We make primary food ingredients from the hemp seed, right? So we take this little hemp seed that's basically comprised of 50% oil and protein and 50% shell fiber, and we take the shell off and we make a really high value protein concentrate, and then we make a really beautiful clarified oil, and we sell that to other food ingredient manufacturers or protein supplement companies that then go on to sell it to consumers in the form of like burgers that don't bleed, or milk analog products, yogurts, and bars, you name it. There's hundreds of products that folks can make from the ingredients that we make here.
the nutritional profile. Can you get into that? Like,
sure,
talk about
yeah,
the protein and the omegas and all that stuff.
Yeah. I won't burn up too much airtime with the nutritionals because there's a bunch of good and valid information online, but it's been lauded by nutritionists around the world for decades, centuries. Chinese have been eating it since forever, and you see how long they last. There's tons of amino acids in it. There's all 8 essential amino acids. One that's really important for the beginning and end of life, which is L-arginine. The limiting amino acid is lysine, but it has a very, very high digestibility score. So adenosine, albumin proteins, which are really similar to the globulin proteins found in our blood, make it easy for our bodies to break it down into those individual amino acids and then reabsorb it into our bodies to repair muscles and organs, and just manganese, magnesium, all sorts of minor vitamins and minerals. The oil has the ideal ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 essential fatty acids. It basically means we can't live if we don't consume it in our diets. And so this little seed does some amazing things.
Quite the superfood.
Yeah, it's tremendous. I mean, people are looking for more and more nutrient-dense foods. They want to be efficient with their calories, and hemp seeds deliver on all those pensions for the consumers.
Nice. So, how did you go about building a supply chain? Where did you find growers? Talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is how are we going about building a supply chain? It's the only tweak I'd make to that, right? It's
still in progress.
Oh boy. We have a long ways to go before we see hemp become anything more than, as Dr. David Williams used to say, as anything more than a grain of sand on the beach of agriculture, right? We have so far to go. We grow 180 million acres of corn and soy in the U.S., just to give you kind of an idea. They grow 100,000 acres in Canada, and like a top year, they might do a little bit more than that this year. I think we're finding our way in terms of genetics, in terms of agronomy, in terms of regionality. There's changing climate. These issues are affecting bringing a new commodity into the rotation in a way that farmers can really rely on what the outcomes are going to be when they put that seed in the ground, and then they have to think about, how am I going to get it to market? There's no elevator that's down the street from 99.9% of domestic row crop farmers here in the U.S. So with the exception of a couple folks like Victory Hemp Foods, where are they going to bring their crop, right? So it kind of starts at it starts with the processors, I really believe, and then reverberates around those processors to build communities of farmers that are trading information back and forth, that are getting access to the best genetics that work for their regions, that are talking to agronomists who have had lots of experience by visiting different farms and can say, hey, this worked over there, that didn't work over there, let's try a little bit more of this. And so that tribal knowledge, which is backed up by science and data, is something that really needs to happen kind of on a regional basis. And so we're seeing a little bit of that, and I think we have a long ways to go, but certainly there's some supply chains and some farmer networks that are showing that they have what was the word? I was just in Montana, and they have grit, right, when it comes to farming. They get the idea of, hey, this is what we want to do, we will figure it out, and we're not going to be dissuaded, right? And that's definitely a hallmark of the successful hemp farmer.
So where are your farmers growing? You're in a few different states?
Yeah, right now we've been working mostly with farmers in Michigan and Montana, so those are our two M's. We've done a little bit in Kentucky, and I would say the CBD wave really kind of knocked our farmers and our supply chain through a loop. Everyone kind of got distracted by the green gold and was left holding the bags. I mean, there's still tons of CBD hanging in barns around the state, and no one's really trying to throw good money after bad. And so we lost a lot of the supply chain to CBD. I think it'll come back. One of the things that's really important to remember is that you got to be growing where your crop fits in terms of an agronomic perspective. And a lot of Kentucky is hills and hollers, right? And you don't want to be plowing up hills and hollers. So we look for farmland that's going to be more adapted to row crop farming. That's going to be a lot. There is some row crop farming around here that works pretty well. Western Kentucky certainly kind of the best place in Kentucky and all through the Midwest. But with the price of corn and beans right now, it's going to be really challenging to get a stand for hemp, grain, and fiber, even if you're able to dual crop it, that was able to compete with the government offering $1,000 guarantees for farmers to put corn in the ground. Right. So knowing that, we end up working with farmers that are in more of the marginal farmland, which is where farmers are a little bit more apt to try something new, try something different. They have to be a little bit more competitive.
All right. Can you talk about the nature of the contracts that you work with the farmers?
Sure. Yeah. We basically buy a lot of grain on spot. Let me make that clear. There's still an enormous amount of farmers that are growing. Despite the economics, despite the challenges, there's still a lot of farmers that are speculating and growing hemp grain. They just want to get an idea of what it's going to do, and so we will buy on spec if it makes if it passes all the micros and the food safety and the food chemistry. A lot of our contracts that we do write are 1-year takeoff agreements, so it's basically a take-all. We contract for acreage. If they grow 500 pounds or they grow 1,500 pounds an acre, we take it all. We have a set price that's established ahead of time, whether it's organic or conventional, anywhere from the 50 to 60 cents a pound for conventional region, up to $1.10 to $1.15 in the organic region, for organic certified. And what else can I say about that? We usually have a schedule that we require our farmers to hold the grain. We don't, as you saw, we only have 2 grain bins here. Yeah. Each one of those is 1,000 bushels, so we can't really hold much more than 100 acres in each one of those if it's a 1,000 pound to the acre yield. And so we need our farmers to be storage spots for us as well. So
they need to do the dry down and all that stuff.
They need to do the dry down. They need to do initial clean. Combine clean is okay, but certainly if we can get them to run it over a screen aspirator, it's going to be ideal to get it to food grade for us, and we'll pay that 5 cents a pound for that cleaning service. Otherwise, we do it and charge it back. But just for a convenience factor and a safety factor, it really pays to get that chaff worked out of there. And then if we need the farmer to hold it after December, we're paying half a cent per pound per month, right? Okay. It's kind of a storage deal, and we take it all the way through the end of the year.
Right. How about varieties? Are there certain grain varieties that you want to see and stuff you don't want to see?
Yeah, we want to see more grain varieties that give better, higher yields and have a higher ratio of protein to oil and have bigger kernels, right? We're not necessarily seeing a lot of those. I would say there's a couple cultivars that rise to the top of the list. The HGI varieties are really good and reliable, and they've done a tremendous job of keeping those varieties within the specs that they kind of advertise. The X59 from Terramax has been pretty good for us. We've seen a lot of consistency with it. Although in the last few years, I think that maybe they've let those lines go a little bit as they've kind of come into the U.S., and that's probably a little bit of a supply and a demand challenge that everyone's faced. So yeah, there's a lot of different varieties. There's some European varieties, and we're keeping our eye on all of those. But it seems to be that most of the Canadian varieties are going to be the most well established, and certainly we have breeders that are really close to the U.S. that we can kind of call on when we run into issues or have questions, and so that's been really helpful. And the Canadians have a lot of history, a lot of experience growing the crop, so to be able to tap them as a resource has been very valuable.
Do you think we will be able to compete with Canada on the grain?
Yeah, absolutely.
For
sure.
How soon?
I would say 3 to 5 years, we're going to start to see some dramatic improvements in genetics that are born out of U.S. genetics programs. I think that we're going to see more agronomists start applying their knowledge to growing hemp and bringing it into the rotation. I think you're going to see more and more farmers that are working together in concert to work with processors to build a little bit of that processing infrastructure and supply chain infrastructure that's critical to being really efficient in the global market and competition-wise. I think we're going to see the USDA start to hopefully put their shoulder into the flywheel and maybe put their hand on the scale of rebalancing some of the, I don't want to call them subsidies, but let's call them supports that we see in other agricultural commodities towards not even hemp, but how about just another rotational crop? Like, let's support more biodiversity on farm. If hemp scratches that itch, then let's unleash the powers that be towards supporting seeing more hemp come into the rotation, so we can get away from just corn and beans or wheat and canola or wheat and legumes, right?
Since you guys are doing human food, you're not waiting on FDA decisions or any kind of like livestock feed decisions, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff. I guess our philosophy has been a little bit of like, there's enough challenges in the world, right? In terms of just building a business and developing markets and figuring out how to process the stuff and figuring out how to build a supply chain. Like, let's take the path of least resistance when it comes to the regulatory channels. Hemp has absolutely been one of these, how do we say, it's been responsible for giving the FDA something that they could say they're in support of when it comes to grain, right? So they came out and they said, they passed on the same day that they said we're the purview on CBD and we're not really sure what it is and where it fits and how to regulate it. The next day they said we approve Fresh Hemp Foods petition for GRAS status on hemp hearts, hemp oil, and hemp protein powder, which was, green light for us. Now all of our customers can incorporate, and all of our customers and customers that we don't even have, talking about the General Mills and the Crafts and the biggest behemoths in the food world can incorporate hemp food ingredients that we make here today into their product portfolios without any fear of legal reprisal from consumers or regulatory oversight, as long as it is meeting the specifications that were identified. And we can meet those specifications, and we do with every batch. Right. Yes. So we've had a lot of support for, that's been, one side of it. And then as far as the feed goes, I think, there's potential there, but also the costs of the grain today are challenging to penetrate really deeply into the feed market. Maybe pet food, I think, would be really interesting. And I think that the unit economics might work for that pretty well. But as feed goes, when it comes to feeding animals, most producers are really concerned about getting their livestock the cheapest rations that they can, and consider cost as really their number one driver for those decisions that they're making. Of course, keeping it within the regulatory framework that they need to adhere to get a safe food out to the consumer. So given that downward pressure on pricing and the amount of subsidies that we're seeing across other agricultural commodities, there's a lot of headwind when it comes to feed. And so if we're going to do anything with animals, it's likely going to be pets, and that is I think that's a great market, and one that there's really very little downward pressure on pricing.
Okay. How about banking? I've heard a lot of hemp businesses have trouble with banking and financial stuff because the word hemp is in the name. Have you guys bumped up against problems with that?
I won't tell you who our bank is, but it hasn't been a problem for us. Yeah, in the 4 years that we've had an account with our national, with our bank, we haven't had an issue. And that is not to say that our situation is different than anyone else's, or is the same as anyone else's. Our name is Victory Foods PBC, right? Public Benefit Corporation is the PBC part, and that's how we sidestep a lot of that. Right. We just don't put it in anyone's face. If they look, if a clerk's looking and they go to our website, we might run into that but we haven't so far. UPS gave us some hassles, QuickBooks gave us some hassles, but we were able to sidestep it for the most part. In being a B2B food ingredient manufacturer, I feel the pain of a lot of our customers who are trying to do Facebook ads and Instagram ads and all that business, and you're probably shut down. But since we're B2B, it's not really, we have a really targeted approach to our sales and marketing, and not a lot of that goes through pay-per-click. So again, kind of an area of path of least resistance for our target market as well.
Right. Plans for the future? What's your growth projection like?
Yeah, keep growing, have an impact on acreage. That's why grain. That's why food, as opposed to CBD or something, we grow an enormous amount of other commodity crops in the U.S., right? 180 million acres of corn and soy in rotation. A lot of those are grown with synthetic chemicals. A lot of them are using chemicals that are pretty harmful for soil and human health. And we think, we stand by our mission, which is to have as big an impact as possible in supporting healthy crop rotations and regenerative farming. And we're doing that with a farmer up in Michigan who's working to be silver regenerative organic certified this summer, which is, as far as I know, he'll be the first regenerative hemp farmer in the world. Maybe behind who's the group in Pennsylvania, the Rodale Institute. Yeah. So they're certainly leaders in this area, and we need to dispel the myth that in order to be a profitable farmer, you have to use chemicals, right? And so if we can usher in that change with the tools of hemp and connecting our market and our consumers to a process and a protocol for regenerative farming, and implement more of that type of production across the U.S. and get that to go head to head with some of these harmful farming practices. I think we're all about figuring out how we can scale, right. And developing these products was the first step. In order to do that, was getting a product figured out that could really pull it through to have that impact on the acres.
Good.
On the acres, yeah.
So we don't have too much more time, but what else would you like people to know about Victory Foods?
Go to our website, stick with it. Ask where your ingredients are coming from in your foods. Like, that's as important a question as any in today's day and age, of plant-based driven solutions for consumers that maybe are looking to incorporate less meat into their diets, are looking to eliminate animals for their diet and get away from the CAFOs and the confined animal feedlots and have that impact. We can still have a better impact if we're prioritizing crops and commodities and ingredients that are grown according to regenerative principles. But if we're prioritizing ingredients that require slash and burn agriculture practices in Brazil, then how much better are we doing? So, I know that there's a lot of noise, and consumers are super busy, and they can only fight so many fights, but as evidenced by the success of Whole Foods and Beyond Meat and all these others, consumers have just an enormity of power to, I would say, change the landscape in terms of what where major dollars are spent and have an impact at the supply chain. And it's scary. It's scary for a lot of folks that are traditional agriculture, that run confined animal feedlots and employ tactics or production methods that are out of line with consumers, right? Those folks are asking, how do we maintain our business model? And I think that hopefully they're watching and listening to this podcast, and they're saying, hey, there's a really good answer. There are solutions out there, and they call us and we have that conversation. And the message isn't to say good versus evil. There's a spectrum of of solutions out there, and it's just which one do you grab onto, and are you willing to accept and embrace like change? And I think that a lot of producers who are doing stuff that they do because that's the way their daddy did it and the way their grandpa did it, and and that's what their chemical dealer or seed dealer tells them is the best way to do it. They're, and they have obligations, and they're part of something that maybe they don't really like, and they want to try something different. Well, we have to present solutions that allow them to succeed, that allow them to stay on their farm, that allow them to live and farm the way they know is a really positive way to do it. And so, that was a long-winded answer to where we're going.
Amen to that. Yeah, without the farmers, there's nothing.
Right.
Yeah, we have no industry.
Right. Totally.
Chad Rosen, thank you very much for your time today. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for coming all the way out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
All right, there you go. Chad Rosen from Victory Hemp. We really enjoyed our time in Kentucky. The landscape was beautiful, and the people we met were super friendly. My daughters remarked about the friendliness of the people several times, from the waitress at Cracker Barrel to the clerk at the Kroger's, and of course the people at Victory and Hempwood and Murray State University. It's been a really nice visit in Kentucky. And I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that we crossed over the Green River, the Green River that John Prine sang about in his song Paradise. Of course, we didn't see Paradise because apparently Mr. Peabody's coal train hauled it away many years ago. All right, we're headed to Kansas today. So until next time, I'll see you out on the road. Episode 142 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2021 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, which is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by yours truly, Eric Herlock, and any music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.